The day my wife presented me with a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice, planted a kiss on my cheek, and expressed her affection, I had already known for 11 months that she'd been deceiving me. I remained composed, didn't utter a word. Instead, I simply smiled, took a sip, and placed the glass onto the kitchen counter as if nothing was amiss. In my profession, one learns something quite swiftly. Revealing your hand is when you lose. My name is Clifton Hargrove. For 31 years, I served on the federal bench in Richmond, Virginia. I presided over fraud cases involving hundreds of millions of dollars. I observed prosecutors dismantle intricate webs of deceit that had taken years to create. I saw defendants who believed themselves invincible enter my courtroom and leave not as free men. I watched men weep. I watched women lie. I watched entire families crumble under the weight of their lies on the witness stand. And I thought, after so many decades, that I was proof against such destruction. I was mistaken. 31 years, as a judge hadn't readied me for the day I sat at our Monument Avenue home's kitchen table, gazing at my 22-year wife across breakfast, convinced that the woman returning my smile wasn't the one I wed. Here's what you should comprehend before I narrate further. I didn't erupt. I didn't accuse her then and there. Nor did I phone for a public confrontation in front of her daughter, her mother, or the attorney she had secretly engaged. Instead, I acted in a more impactful manner. I waited. Stay with me as I unfold this tale, and you'll grasp why my silence was the most destructive action I could have taken. You'll also understand why that smug attorney's grin vanished in a conference room 3 weeks later, lasting only 4 minutes before fading away permanently. Before moving forward, consider subscribing if you appreciate such stories. In the comments, share your viewing location. Now let's delve into it. I retired from my judicial position 2 years ago in spring at the age of 57. I reached a stage where I yearned to breathe freely once more. Over 3 decades of dealing with others' emergencies had left its mark, one I didn't fully comprehend until I stopped going to work and discovered that I had forgotten the feeling of tranquility. My wife, Rosalind, had been advocating for my retirement for 2 years prior, which I finally consented to. She expressed a desire to travel. She wanted our mornings to be free from alarm clocks and court records. She depicted a vision of what our life could be like, the two of us spontaneously driving to Charlottesville on a Tuesday or spending a leisurely weekend in Annapolis, possibly even embarking on that trip to Portugal she had been discussing since our 15th anniversary. It all sounded enchanting. I trusted her judgment. At age 53, Rosalind maintained an ageless charm, a deeper beauty that surpassed youth's transience. For 2 decades, she honed her craft as an interior designer, cultivating an impressive clientele residing in the fashionable districts of Richmond and its western end. Her talent lay in discerning clients' unspoken desires, complemented by her refined taste, patience, and the knack for making each client feel uniquely valued. Besides her professional life, these skills proved indispensable in other aspects. Rosalind and I shared a daughter, Priya, who was 26 years old when our story unfolded. Working in marketing for a real estate development firm in Northern Virginia, Priya would visit Richmond monthly for Sunday dinners. Her intelligence, ambition, and devotion to her mother were striking, qualities that had always left an impression on me. They shared an intimate bond similar to some mothers and daughters, forming a self-contained duo with their unique linguistics and mannerisms that sometimes excluded others. I had always thought this was simply the nature of mother-daughter relationships. I convinced myself it wasn't personal. However, one of my many misconceptions was proven incorrect. The first fissure occurred in October, roughly 14 months after my retirement. It didn't involve a telltale lipstick stain or a revealing hotel receipt. Instead, it was an indistinct sensation, a subtle change in the atmospheric conditions that most might have dismissed as mere paranoia. Rosalind had always been open and expressive. She shared her day over dinner and called to check in when not occupied with appointments. For 20 years, her real-time storytelling of her life, which at times was charming but occasionally draining, had been a constant comfort to me. Then, around early October, she fell silent, not distant exactly, but somehow more private. She remained affectionate in the easy ways, asking about my day, laughing at my jokes, holding my hand in the car. But the storytelling ceased. The spontaneous phone calls lessened, and her phone handling habits shifted. It went from casually present to deliberately managed, often face down on the counter with a dim screen, even taken into the bathroom in a new way. I noticed these changes, but remained silent. After all, I am a person who has spent 3 decades constructing federal cases, and I recognized that acting on incomplete evidence can be disastrous. So I watched, maintained a neutral expression, kept my voice welcoming, and kept my eyes open. By November, I had the necessary evidence. Her schedule exhibited inconsistencies that I couldn't explain. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, she allegedly met clients, but when I subtly inquired about projects she should have been working on, her responses were vague, more akin to someone repeating a pretext rather than describing actual events. Twice, she returned home wearing an unfamiliar perfume, floral and stronger than her usual choice, a scent that lingers when one has been near another person. I am not a detective, but I know how to locate individuals. His name was Bradley Sutton, aged 44, divorced. He managed a small architecture firm from a restored Victorian on Broad Street, and Rosalind had been acquainted with him through a mutual client 18 months prior. The individual was precisely the sort I could have anticipated, had I allowed any predictions. Younger than me, professionally linked to her sphere, polished aesthetically to appeal to those who value such traits. Within roughly a week, I gathered all the necessary information. A private investigator, Davis Kelleher, whom I employed, was a former Henrico County detective who had worked on fraud cases I had overseen in the past. He was discreet, meticulous, and visibly uneasy when delivering his report. "Judge," he began, "due to my ingrained habits, I'm sorry. It has been ongoing for approximately 11 months. 11 months. This took me back to the winter, to the Christmas we had spent together, which I thought was a genuine family, the dinner I had hosted for Rosalind's sister and brother-in-law. The New Year's Eve we had spent with friends at a farmhouse in Goochland County. All of it, it now seemed, was merely an act. All of it occurred during that time. For 6 days I remained still, contemplating the revelation before taking action. Spanning those 6 days felt endless as I found myself seated opposite her at our breakfast table, observing her pour my orange juice. During those same 6 days, she uttered, "I love you," before leaving for an engagement, and in that moment I understood how hollow those words had become for her. However, those 6 days were indispensable as they allowed me to grasp the entire situation before forming judgments. In this time, I unveiled a truth. Rosalind was not merely engaging in an affair. She was simultaneously reorganizing her finances. It was a brokerage account statement, a seemingly trivial administrative notice that had gone overlooked for months, which first piqued my curiosity about a transfer small enough to appear routine, yet significant when carefully examined. Thus, I began to scrutinize closely. With my attorney Geraldine Osai, a seasoned family law practitioner in Richmond, I traced the comprehensive financial landscape. The findings were systematic, meticulous, and undeniably premeditated. During around 8 months, Rosalind transferred roughly $340,000 from joint accounts to ones under her sole name. These transfers were strategically arranged to stay below reporting thresholds, executed across various financial institutions. Her actions suggested the expertise of someone who had consulted a lawyer beforehand, indicating this was a long-planned scheme I hadn't fully grasped yet. As Geraldine spread out the documentation on her conference table, she looked at me with an expression that conveyed professional disappointment tinged with unspoken sympathy, almost like she was trying not to say, "I'm sorry." She said, "Clifton, whoever is advising her is skilled." "This isn't subpar work," I acknowledged, "so let's excel instead." It was then that I initiated several choices, ultimately leading Rosalind's lawyer to abruptly rise from a conference table, his complexion resembling outdated chalk. However, I must share the tale of Priya first, as she remains an integral part of this narrative in ways I didn't anticipate. Priya and I had always been close, or so I thought. We had our disagreements. She held traits akin to Rosalind, outgoing, vocal, unafraid of crowds where I felt less comfortable. Yet, she was also insightful and impartial, qualities I admired greatly. I hadn't foreseen her capable of what she did. I discovered the truth on a Thursday afternoon in December, 6 weeks following my initial confirmation. I had visited her apartment in Alexandria for what she had termed an unexpected early birthday lunch. She came across as friendly on the phone, sincere, and I was eager for our meeting. We convened at a Thai eatery near her apartment, which she had been excitedly discussing for months. Lunch was unremarkable. It was routine. We discussed her job, a project she was overseeing the holidays. Then, while waiting for the bill, she reached over the table and placed her hand on mine, a gesture she used before sharing important news. "Father," she began, "I have something to tell you." She then disclosed that she had been aware of her mother's relationship with Bradley Sutton for 7 months, had even met him multiple times, found him appealing, believed her mother deserved happiness, and hoped I would eventually comprehend that some marriages just reach their end. This was what she told me, her father, who hadn't spoken a word about the matter to any family member yet. She didn't seem to realize this. I stayed quiet for a while, just like I would on the bench when someone said something in open court that unintentionally revealed too much. Then I calmly asked her if she knew that her mother had been reorganizing the family's finances for nearly a year. She blinked. "What do you mean by reorganizing?" I replied. "I mean transferring money, Priya, substantial amounts." She shook her head rapidly, much like people do when they want to dismiss information before fully comprehending it. "That's not, Dad. I believe you might be misunderstanding things. Mom wouldn't—" "How many times have you encountered Bradley Sutton?" There was a pause. "A few times. Has your mother ever spoken with you about her plans for the house, the accounts?" She paused longer this time. She mentioned that she had been considering things, pondering what the next phase might look like. She mentioned talking to someone. In that moment, Priya's expression revealed everything. She was unaware of the financial matters, but she had been aware of her mother's intentions. She was prepared to aid in her departure and hadn't shared a word with me about it. I settled the bill, embraced my daughter at the door, told her I loved her, and drove back to Richmond in quiet contemplation, realizing that Rosalind's associates in her plan were more numerous than I had assumed. It was then that I decided to cease waiting and begin acting. I initiated the divorce proceedings on a chilly Monday morning in January, without prior notice to Rosalind. There was no emotional goodbye scene the night before, no dinner speech, just a departure at 8:30 am as if headed for my usual Tuesday breakfast on Carey Street, but instead driving to Geraldine's office to sign the divorce papers. 11:15 that morning, Rosalind was served at her home. A process server knocked on the front door during one of her client calls, prompting her to excuse herself. I confirmed this because I was parked 2 blocks away, and Geraldine's assistant had confirmed the service. Later in the day, I went to my brother Leonard's house in Chesterfield. 4 years older than me, Leonard had been silently angry on my behalf since I shared the whole story 3 weeks ago. Upon my arrival, he had already prepared a room for me without being asked. He was silent, merely handing me a cup of coffee and seating himself opposite me at the kitchen table. "It's done," he said. "It's done," I echoed. What followed unfolded faster than anticipated, but not as Rosalind had predicted. Graham Fielding was her attorney. He was 51 years old, a partner at an East Main Street firm managing affluent divorce cases and prenuptial disagreements for Richmond's professional circle. He excelled in his profession, exhibiting the traits common among certain lawyers: aggressiveness, self-assuredness, and familiarity with success due to clients of substantial means and a distinct advantage. Unbeknownst to me later, he informed Rosalind that she held a strong position. The financial transactions, though questionable, were justifiable. A retired judge would prefer private resolution over public court battle, and an amicable settlement was imminent. He miscalculated my character, underestimating who I truly was. The initial lawyers' conference took place without either of us present. Geraldine shared later that Fielding initiated discussions with an unusually favorable settlement amount, causing her to double-check her interpretation of the situation. "He seemed ready for negotiations," Geraldine explained. "He appeared to assume a defensive stance from us." "What then?" I inquired. "I informed him we weren't considering a settlement," she continued, "that we were prepared to investigate every financial transaction over the past 3 years, and that we had proof of these transfers, intending to classify them as wasteful dissipation of marital assets." Apparently, Fielding reacted calmly at the time. He was seasoned enough not to reveal his hand instantly, but Geraldine mentioned a brief flash of understanding behind his professional demeanor, an acknowledgement that this wasn't the negotiation he had anticipated. What remained undisclosed to him was the second part of our planned approach. Understanding is crucial about Richmond, Virginia, and the social circles Rosalind frequented, where she was well connected. Being an interior designer for affluent clients grants a presence in a specific social terrain, invitations to exclusive events, associations with influential figures, and a reputation of having impeccable taste. I've always been somewhat on the outskirts of those circles, as my realm has been law courts and legalities. Although I held esteem within those spaces, I did not possess Rosalind's profound integration into Richmond's philanthropic and artistic elite. However, unbeknownst to Rosalind, and something I hadn't openly disclosed, was the wealth I had amassed during my 31-year tenure on the federal bench. My personal assets, distinct from our joint possessions, have been meticulously managed even before our marriage. My grandfather passed down land to me beyond Fredericksburg, while my father's investments gradually increased over 4 decades. I managed my federal income carefully and was even more cautious with my inherited wealth. For 30 years, the worth of what I owned independently expanded in ways I never disclosed at social gatherings or shared with suspicious individuals. Rosalind vaguely understood my financial stability. She was unaware of the specific details. This wasn't a coincidence. After my retirement, it seems she started consulting Fielding about the prospects of divorce and believed that the joint assets were the main objective, underestimating that transfers she made gave her an advantage in their acquisition. She was unaware of the estate. Also unknown to her were the contents of my will and the fact that a month prior to filing the divorce, I had consulted Harold Whitman, a meticulous and reserved attorney who handled our family's affairs for nearly 2 decades, and during that meeting, I made a simple adjustment. I revised my will. The conference room at Geraldine's law firm accommodated 12 individuals around an extended mahogany table. On the day of our initial 4-way meeting, there were only 6 occupants. Geraldine and her colleagues sat on one side, while Fielding and his counterpart occupied the opposite end, with Rosalind and me situated at opposite extremities. Since the day the legal documents were delivered, it had been 6 weeks since I last saw Rosalind. As expected, she appeared the same, calm in appearance, but her underlying strain of that composure was evident. She meticulously donned her attire, a habit reserved for significant events, exhibiting the finesse of a woman who recognized the significance of presentation as a means of expression. Her selection was astute. She exuded an air of dignity, a quality deliberate, signifying her belief in the importance of conveying her worth during this negotiation. A smile graced her lips upon my seating, a politely reserved gesture indicative of 2 mature individuals navigating a difficult scenario with professionalism. I acknowledged her with a nod. Fielding initiated the discussion by reiterating the settlement proposal he had conveyed to Geraldine, a distribution of joint assets seemingly balanced on paper, but inclining substantially in favor of Rosalind following adjustments for prior transfers and particular valuations Fielding chose to present more advantageously for Rosalind. His delivery was refined, a quality I acknowledged. Gerald had a familiar air of assurance from often presenting similar proposals, anticipating the start of a fruitful negotiation. However, Geraldine remained impassive as he concluded. Upon ending, she reached for the folder before her and stated, "We acknowledge your proposal, but we're rejecting it. I'd like to delve into the reasons so that we can engage in a meaningful dialogue about what an authentic resolution entails." For the next 45 minutes, Geraldine systematically presented the evidence we had gathered: financial transactions traced, time-stamped, and categorized as dissipation according to Virginia law. A timeline showing the transfers started months before any divorce talk, making them non-preparatory but strategic, and patterns of behavior suggesting these were not ordinary account management decisions. Fielding maintained his calm during most of this exposition. Periodically, he inserted objections and revised descriptions, some of which were valid, as he was a skilled attorney who had prepared thoroughly. However, from my vantage point across the large table, I could discern that Rosalind was finding it increasingly difficult to mask her emotions while scrutinizing the papers. Then, Geraldine proceeded to the second part of her folder. "We must also consider the matter of Mr. Hargrove's separate estate," she announced. "Since it is not a marital asset and isn't subject to division in this case, but it's significant for determining the terms of a final settlement." Fielding furrowed his brow. "No documentation on any separate estate has been presented to us," he retorted. "We're supplying it now," Geraldine replied, pushing a single summary document across the table. I observed Fielding pick up the document. I saw his eyes scan the page. I noticed his colleague lean slightly to catch a glimpse of the content. A moment of silence filled the room, then Fielding placed the document and met my gaze for the first time. "Has this estate undergone recent changes?" he inquired. "Yes, 4 weeks ago," I responded. "Could I inquire about these alterations?" "You can contact Harold Whitman, my attorney," I explained. He'll verify that I've revised my will and altered the beneficiaries of my individual assets. These modifications are complete and legally executed. There was another pause as Rosalind stiffened at her end of the table. And the recipients of the updated will? Fielding inquired cautiously. Various charities, my brother, and a scholarship fund I established at the University of Richmond School of Law, I replied. Fielding set his pen aside. He glanced at Rosalind, then looked back at me. Then, with care, he asked, Mr. Hargrove, do you comprehend the significance of your statement? I served as a federal judge for 31 years, I responded. I have a fair understanding of magnitude. The ensuing quietness mirrored the hush in a courtroom when a statement demanded heavy contemplation from all present. First, Rosalind's composure faltered. She didn't erupt emotionally, nor did she shout, but her knuckles tightened on the table and her jaw tensed subtly, a change I recognized. For a brief instant, the facade wavered. Fielding requested a short break. The events of that recess eluded me. However, Geraldine, adept at sensing the atmosphere in nearby spaces, informed me later that the interaction between Rosalind and Fielding had undergone a substantial transformation. The self-assured client who entered the conference room, convinced of her advantageous stance, was now grappling with an unfamiliar truth, an element omitted from the original strategy. The strategy, as Fielding presumably outlined, was based on the assumption that marital possessions were the primary objective. The transactions she had made served as an initial advantage. If relevant, the affair was a complex issue but not a fatal one in Virginia, a no-fault divorce state. She had been told she was in a favorable position. However, neither she nor Fielding were aware that the marital assets, significant as they were not the largest part of what I possessed. Moreover, they were unaware of my intention to refrain from negotiating a settlement involving sharing or safeguarding that separate estate with someone who had deceived me for 11 months. Upon their return, Fielding's tone had shifted. His initial confidence was replaced by caution and carefulness. My client would like to reconsider the settlement terms, he stated. That sounds reasonable, Geraldine replied affably. It took 8 additional weeks to finalize the agreement, a process that left no room for claims of untouchedness. A span of 22 years intertwined cannot vanish without consequence. Difficult moments surfaced during those 8 weeks, challenges I hadn't entirely anticipated, not due to self-doubt, but because sorrow doesn't necessitate doubt to manifest. Even when you're certain something has ended, the burden of what was remains. However, I feel compelled to share my emotions on the day we signed the final documents. I drove from Geraldine's office along the boulevard, passing through the neighborhood where I had lived for 16 years, past Richmond's old neighborhoods that I knew since my adulthood. The trees lining Monument Avenue were starting to display the first hint of early spring's gray-green. The light in March, as it often does in Richmond, was low, clear, and unexpectedly captivating. Beneath all, a profound tranquility prevailed. The funds Rosalind transferred were duly accounted for in the final agreement and largely balanced within the settlement framework. She received her equitable share of the joint marital assets, accurately appraised. She got nothing from the separate estate since it was never a marital asset. She did not receive the Monument Avenue house, which I retained. As far as I knew, Bradley Sutton warmly welcomed her to her new life's phase with whatever preparations he had made. I genuinely wish for her that it meets her expectations. This statement is sincere and devoid of sarcasm. I hold this sentiment because I have moved past the wound enough to offer kindness. She made decisions that dismantled our marriage, but she remains a person with whom I built a life over 22 years. I am not a man who harbors animosity. It is too burdensome, and I've witnessed its destructive power for too long. Since our divorce, Priya and I have engaged in difficult discussions. The pain of realizing that your child picked a side before understanding all sides, and that side excluded you, carries a unique sting. However, I comprehend that she was in an unyielding predicament, and choosing loyalty to her mother does not equate to a moral flaw. Furthermore, her perspective shifted substantially upon learning about the financial matters. Although we are no longer in the place we once were, the fact that we are communicating is something I am choosing to hold on to. Have many inquired about my remorse since the revelation, asking if I would act otherwise if my cautious strategy, patience, meticulous documentation, and legal accuracy were appropriate, or if I should have immediately confronted Rosalind upon learning the truth in our kitchen on that fateful day. This question has weighed heavily on me as it demands a thoughtful response. Here's what I've concluded. The truth would surface regardless. Affairs inevitably end, hidden financial matters are uncovered, and the intricate facade of deceit eventually reveals its flaws. The only uncertainty was who controlled the narrative, her or me. I opted for the latter. I won't deny that witnessing Graham Fielding's reaction upon reading the estate's summary was not wholly unpleasant, but my primary motivation stems from a belief in a system that values evidence, documentation, and informed decisions. For 31 years, I've seen too many individuals step into courtrooms ill-prepared. I aim to be an exception. The Hargrove Foundation for Ethical Practice at the University of Richmond School of Law grants scholarships to second-year students who excel academically and have a proven dedication to pro bono work, reflecting my commitment to this philosophy. The initial recipient was a young woman residing in Roanoke who financed her college education and her law school through a mix of loans and part-time jobs. Her name is Tessa. Upon discovering about the scholarship, she penned a letter to me. She expressed that at the commencement of law school, she had fretted over the expense of the degree, potentially compelling her to accept any well-paying job rather than the one she was passionate about. However, knowing the scholarship's existence had altered her perspective on the following 3 years. I keep this letter on my study desk. My study room is located in the house on Monument Avenue, now owned by me, that remains peaceful in the mornings as I am yet to fully adapt to its serenity. I prepare my coffee myself. Occasionally, I delve into case law not due to obligation, but because old practices prove tougher to discard than anticipated. Once a month, I travel to Fredericksburg to traverse the land left to me by my grandfather. 60 years old and unexpectedly starting a new phase, far from anticipated. It's not as I envisioned, and scarcely anything within it is valuable. Allow me to share what I wish you to remember. Life has instances when the foundation suddenly crumbles without prior notice, when belief solidified for long seemed to transform into something else, and when the individual you were prior to that moment must confront the one you have since become. These moments are dreadful, I won't sugarcoat it, but they can also, if you stay vigilant, teach lessons unparalleled by anything else. They expose the true nature of those around you. They test your resilience under pressures purposely designed to break it. And they reveal, if you're open to seeing, the burdens carried unconsciously, waiting for that critical moment of tension to be exposed. 11 months into a deception I hadn't named, Rosalind gave me orange juice and confessed her affection, unknowingly offering me the lucidity needed to comprehend the direction my life should take. I drank the juice, set down the glass, and waited until I was ready. What struck me most about Clifton's narrative wasn't the affair or the money, it was his patience. Most of us react impulsively when we sense betrayal, escalating conflicts, confronting directly, and that's precisely what the other person anticipates. Clifton chose a different path. He remained silent, prepared himself, and once he acted, the situation was resolved before she realized the game had begun. This isn't callousness, it's clarity. And I believe there's a lesson in that for all of us, be it in relationships, friendships, or business matters. The individual who maintains control over their response typically dictates the result. Instead of remaining silent, I invite your thoughts. Feel free to leave a comment below. If you were in the same situation, would patience have been your choice, or would you have spoken up immediately when you first learned about it? For those intrigued by this topic, consider subscribing for weekly updates. Rest assured, the upcoming content is worth watching out for.